Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner, and in today's post Liège-Bastogne-Liège, I want to talk about Tadej Pogačar, of course, and I want to go a little bit deeper into some of the tactics that we saw on yesterday's last monument race of the Spring Classics up in Belgium, Liège-Bastogne-Liège. Now, Tadej Pogačar, we know now, crashed at about 84 kilometers into yesterday's Liège-Bastogne-Liège, along with Mikel Honoré, the EF education rider. Mario Giannetti, the manager for UAE Team Emirates, described the crash as Honoré having two blowouts, both the front and rear tire, of course. That caused the crash, and then Tadej Pogačar's off into the hospital. Now, at that moment in time, nobody knows exactly what's going on with Tadej Pogačar, but if you're one of the managers of the big teams, so talking Ineos and Jumbo-Visma, when we're talking about the Tour de France that's coming up, you have to ask yourself, how bad is the break? Is the break something serious where you need tons of surgery, or is it an easy break? When the crash happens, all the managers are right away thinking about what are the upcoming races. Now, Tadej Pogačar, of course, was going to finish off his spring season here at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. So if you're going to break your arm, it's not bad timing in terms of finishing all the classics. He did win Flanders, he did win Amstel, he did win Flèche Wallonne. So crashing out of Liège-Bastogne-Liège is not a catastrophic problem in terms of the beginning of the season. But we're just at around 10 weeks before the Tour de France starts. So UAE Team Emirates' immediate concern is, can Tadej Pogačar, the Slovenian, make it to the Tour de France? And all the other big teams' main concern is, if Tadej Pogačar can't make it to the Tour de France, do we change our Giro lineup? Does Jumbo-Visma say Primož Roglič, who's going to the Giro, would you pull him out of the Giro and then get him ready for the Tour de France? It's a question, right? You look and you have Jonas Vingegaard, who they believe can win the Tour de France like he did in last year's 2022 edition against Tadej Pogačar. But you start to ask yourself, wow, if Tadej Pogačar has a serious break, are we going to save Primož Roglič from the Giro and bring him to the Tour to have double power when we get to the Tour de France because Tadej Pogačar may or may not be there? Well, other teams are thinking the same thing, right? You look, and we're talking about Team Ineos, Garrett Thomas, who went podium at last year's Tour de France, and he's doing the Giro d'Italia too. Ineos have to start asking that same question to themselves, if we want to send Garrett Thomas to the Giro or send him to the Tour de France. Well, we didn't have to wait too long to see Tadej Pogačar post up. And of course, he has the break on his left wrist, but it looks like he has a short cast on. Now, that was strange because back in '98, when I was riding for FDJ here, I was doing Midi-Libre, getting ready for the Tour de France. And at that point in time, when the race started at Midi-Libre, I wasn't part of the Tour de France squad. But before the morning stage, the last morning stage of Midi-Libre, I was told before the stage started, Horner, you're going to the Tour de France. Now, we got into the stage. It was crazy crosswinds. We're going down one of those spectacular French roads where they had massive trees all along the road, and I'm up there in the echelon with 6, 7, 8 Festina riders, and then myself and one or two other riders. When Yevgeny Berzin, my teammate from Française de Jour, bridged across from the second group, I moved over and I was last in line, and I let Yevgeny Berzin in there. Once I let him in, it squeezed us really tight across the French roads because of how narrow they are. And up front, one of the Festina riders must have swerved to dodge something in the road, because that swerve went all the way through the echelon and down to me, and I went straight into the back of Yevgeny Berzin. Up on his back, dropped straight down, and ended up breaking the wrist right here. Later had to get pins in it. Now, we're talking about recovery time is always about 6 weeks with a break, but if it's a serious break, when the cast comes off, maybe it's 6 weeks, but you can still have a ton of soreness. My wrist took a solid probably 2 years to get back some of the full movement, and even to this day, it's not 100% normal because of the break and the chip that I had in the bone. But when you're looking at Tadej Pogačar, what I noticed is he still had a half cast on when he posted up to his Twitter account with the cast showing there instead of a full length cast. So half cast would normally tell me it's a bit more stable of a break, or the way that they were doing the surgery made it more stable. So maybe he'll be a little bit more lucky than I was in 1998, because in 1998 it was very difficult, even when the cast came off, to get everything ready to go big time pushing hard on the bike when you have so much bend in your wrist every time you're standing up and climbing. That twist in the wrist made it really complicated and always made the wrist sore, especially when it got cold out. And that was for about a good solid 2 years. Now, looks like Tadej Pogačar could have enough time because it's only about 7 weeks to Tour of Slovenia. Remember last year he dominated there at Tour of Slovenia and then went into the Tour de France. So if the cast does come off at 6 weeks, it looks like the Slovenian would be able to make his home week race before the Tour de France and see how his fitness is. Now, of course, you can start training pretty quickly once you have a stable fracture and once it starts to heal. What I noticed is about 10 days for me to be able to start doing some solid training on the bike. Can you get on the trainer and ride half hour, 1 hour? Sure, something stable like that. You usually just put the TT bars on the bike and you run the home trainer that way. And then you can still slow the progress of the fitness dropping down with even just a 1 hour training ride, or perhaps you split it up in the day and you do an easy hour in the morning and an easy hour at night. Now, also keep in mind, Tadej Pogačar, I'm sure, was probably going to take a week off the bike or maybe 10 days anyways because it's the end of the beginning of the season all the way up here at Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and he's been racing solid all the way from February up till now, so the Slovenian was going to take a break anyways. Probably only changing maybe 3 days, 5 days of real training time that he'd take a little bit longer rest than he normally would. But of course, he's not going to be able to do the big 6 hours with a half cast on. That's when things are going to get more difficult. And we'll see how dedicated the Slovenian is if he's willing to do a ton of hours on the home trainer while he has the half cast on, because that's the only way you can keep the arm and the wrist stable without putting too much pressure. Every time I went out on the road in 1998 training with the half cast on, of course, it was really sore for hours afterwards if I was doing 3 or 4 hour training rides until finally I can have the cast taken off and the pins pulled out of the wrist. Tadej Pogačar, the way I understand it, does have some kind of pin around the wrist that's holding something together, so he's going to need a little bit of time, and 6 weeks is definitely what he's going to need if he has pins in there before you can pull the cast off and really get freedom of motion and be able to go out there and train harder. So it's questionable whether or not if he could hit Tour of Slovenia, but can he make the Tour de France? Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. When we're looking 10 weeks out, you need 6 weeks before the cast comes off, but it could still be very tender. Now let's talk about a little bit of the tactics at Liège-Bastogne-Liège, because I told you guys yesterday I didn't care much for the Jan Tratnik and Magnus Sheffield attack with 85 kilometers to go when they were in the town of Stvolo. Now Stvolo is the famous part where really the racing starts coming to life, because about 105 kilometers, 100K to go in the race is when it starts going curb to curb. And then you have 4 solid, stiff climbs, and each climb is straight up and normally precedes a difficult descent into a tight right turn to start the next climb, with only the last climb when you leave Stvolo being the one that you kind of fly straight through town, and then you go out and you start climbing up the wide road there where we saw Julian Alaphilippe at the back of the group, as he had already done a couple pulls on the climbs just before and then was suffering as he's leaving the town of Stvolo. Now, the reason why I don't like the tack here at 85 kilometers to go, in 2012, I was there with Radio Shack Nissan, and our plan was to make it hard through that same section. And I didn't like the plan because I always thought the best tactic, unless you have the strongest rider in the race, you want the racing to be easiest as possible, but you want his teammates on the front of the strongest rider, Remco Evenepoel, to be pulling. Now, we saw when they're coming into Stvolo there with under 100 kilometers to go, already Julian Alaphilippe had his Soudal Quick-Step riders on the front going 100%. So I didn't see any reason to send one rider like Jan Tratnik, who clearly was on good form at yesterday's Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and I just thought you were wasting the energy from the Jumbo-Visma rider going so early. One rider by himself going 85 kilometers from the finish is just not going to be that dominant and put any kind of real stress on a team of riders chasing behind. They can catch him, of course, at 35 kilometers to go when they get into La Redoute, or they can catch them easily on one of the other climbs. And the further you get into the climbs, the more tired that Jan Tratnik's going to be anyway. So if Remco Evenepoel does come up on his own and catch him later, if we're even talking about on Roche de Falcon, even that late in the race, there's no way Jan Tratnik's going to stay with Remco Evenepoel. Now, some of the tactics like that I wasn't a fan of because I had experience of seeing what it was like with Radio Shack when we tried to make it hard through those same 4 sections of climb of Stvolo, and it didn't pay off for us. That year it was raining just like it was in yesterday's Liège Bastogne Liège, and for me, I ended up with not enough clothing on, went back to the car, tried to get my clothing from Johan Bernil, ended up getting a rain jacket, but it wasn't my rain jacket because my rain jacket was long sleeve and the one I got was a vest. So I ended up freezing out and ended up dropping out of the 2012 Liège Bastogne Liège. But I still got to see what those tactics meant as you're going through Stvolo, to know that there's no way I want to make the racing harder if I'm Jumbo-Visma, and there's no way specifically if I'm Team Ineos do I want to make the race any harder through the 4 most difficult climbs at Liège-Bastogne-Liège until we get into the very final with 35 kilometers to go. Now, how would I play it? Okay, we pull Magnus Sheffield out of that move of trying to follow Jan Tratnik, and we pull Jan Tratnik back for Jumbo-Visma. We keep, of course, the pressure with Stvolo Quick-Step's going to keep going on the front because they want to make it hard to go in with 35 kilometers to go for Remco Evenepoel to destroy everyone. We know that. So already Stvolo Quick-Step's going to use up their whole team and try to save just one Ian van Wilder for the start of La Redoute so that he can go up the climb incredibly fast, start hurting everyone just like he did on yesterday's race, and then launch Remco Evenepoel near the top. Hopefully, Remco Evenepoel, when we saw yesterday where he slipped the pedal when he moved off to the right, and we all wondered, why isn't he attacking right now? Well, if you look, his back wheel hit some paint just as he accelerated on the pedals, and that was pointed out to me in one of the comments, and later I saw his interview where he said he slipped on the hill. So when I went back and watched it, that's why Remco Evenepoel's attack came just a little bit later in La Redoute, and why Ian van Wilder had to pull harder. Now, if I'm Team Ineos, how do I go into La Redoute if I didn't attack with Magnus Sheffield earlier in the town of Stvolo? Well, once we hit La Redoute, I think unless Tom Peacock has shown some exceptional power numbers while out on training, I think I keep the whole team together, or I keep Tom Peacock with the second group going up over La Redoute and tell the other riders from Team Ineos, when you're talking Magnus Sheffield, Omar Fraley, and of course Laurens de Plus, who's on good form, and then of course Pavel Sivakov, who's also on good form as he's coming from Tour of Alps. We know he's on fine form, so I keep those guys together. We go up over the climb. Tom Peacock stays easy in whatever second group he's in that's behind Remco Evenepoel. Those two groups come together, and then Ineos have 4 riders for 20 kilometers to ride as hard as they possibly can to put pressure on Remco Evenepoel. Now, you don't have to bring Remco Evenepoel back, but you do have to keep him at 10-20 seconds, going full gas as hard as he possibly can, with Team Ineos back there chasing with 3 or 4 riders, hopefully 4, and Tom Peacock sitting on. Other teams might have multiple riders back there, because we saw Trek Segafredo had not 1 but 2 guys because they were chasing in the second group right behind Tom Peacock after he got dropped, and that was Ciccone and Skilmos. So if one of those riders sacrificed with the Ineos riders, now all of a sudden you have 3, 4, possibly 5 guys with the Trek Segafredo rider on the front pulling. And then, of course, Bahrain Victorious had not 1 but 2 riders back there, with Ion Izagirre being the second rider and Guillaume Martin, who finished in the top 10 of yesterday's Liège-Bastogne-Liège. So if they put a rider on the front, now all of a sudden you have solid numbers back there to chase one Remco Evenepoel, who happens to be the best rider at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. So I can't tell you if this tactic would work, but I could tell you it would look a lot better, and the end result would be we would have had a much better race at Liège-Bastogne-Liège if you had 5, 6 teams or 5, 6 riders back there from 3 different teams chasing, putting pressure on Remco Evenepoel all the way into the Roche à Falcon, the last final climb at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. That's solid at over 10% sections in that climb. And then all of a sudden, Tom Peacock has to launch from there, and he has fresher legs because he didn't blow himself going over La Redoute trying to stay with Remco Evenepoel and then getting ridden off the wheel. Instead, possibly, Tom Peacock's had more time to eat, drink, recover sitting on the wheels, went easier up La Redoute, and his teammates just went 100% for him, selling out while he's sitting back there on the wheel. If the gap is now at 10 seconds or 20 seconds, possibly Tom Peacock could jump across that gap like we saw him do up to Ben Healy to go and start fighting for a podium position at yesterday's Liège-Bastogne-Liège. Would it work? I don't know. I couldn't tell you for sure because we all know Remco Evenepoel is on fantastic form. But every time you see Remco Evenepoel attack, Primoz Roglic attack, and you see Tadej Pogačar attacking when they're going from far out, they're always, all the race leaders are trying to follow with them, and then they always blow when the domestiques are still nearby. But I can guarantee you when the domestiques see their race leader like Tom Pidcock going up the road, when you're Omar Fraley, you're going, that's it, my job's done. I got you into La Redoute and I'm done. But if you said, hey, guys, we got to get over La Redoute, you have to stay with Tom Pidcock for as long as possible, and you set a steady pace over La Redoute, and then you still have some domestiques around you, it's going to change the tactics at the finish if you have 5 or 6 guys that are 100% selling out to the Rocha Falcon instead of the GC leaders or the team leaders of Liège-Bastogne-Liège back there trying to pull for 20K going in the Rocha Falcon. You have their domestiques doing it. Now you have a little bit fresher leaders when they hit Rocha Falcon, and possibly they can come up to Remco Evenepoel. Either way, I can't guarantee you that it would bring you the win, but I can guarantee you that we would have had a better race if the other teams just said, hey, we can't follow Remco Evenepoel up La Redoute, so we're going to let him go. We're going to stay back here with numbers, and then we're going to chase with as many domestiques as we can, and then we're going to light it up on Rocha Falcon and try to bring him back right there, and hopefully he tired himself out for 20K of pulling all out before Rocha Falcon instead of chasing a bunch of devastated leaders back there. You're chasing just the domestiques who know their work is done at the beginning of Rocha Falcon. Now that's my tactical reason for it, and again, can't tell you if it would work, but I can tell you one thing: it would have looked like a better race in yesterday's Liège-Bastogne-Liège if all the teams played their tactics a little bit wiser on yesterday's race, and they didn't just all try to follow Remco Evenepoel's huge attack up La Redoute and all the way into the finish of yesterday's Liège-Bastogne-Liège. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. We got Roman D coming, so I'll cover it on the butterfly effect, and I'll see you guys in the next edition real soon.